Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Secrets of High Performing Retailers, Real World Strategies for Q4 Success. I'm Jamie, the Customer Training and Enablement Manager here at HappyOrNot, and I'll be guiding you to today's session alongside Scott from HappyOrNot and Andy from Sensormatic Solutions. Before we dive into the slides, I'll ask Andy and Scott to briefly introduce themselves. Andy?
Hi, so I'm Andy Sumpter. I'm the Head of Consulting and Analytics at Sensormatic.
Hey everyone, I'm Scott Erickson. I am the VP of Global Partnerships and Alliances at HappyOrNot.
Thanks, Andy and Scott. All right, let's dive right into today's topics. So we really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. We know that retail's golden corridor is absolutely critical. So we are all here today to help you make the most of it with practical strategies and data-driven insights. Now here's what we will cover today. So first, we'll talk about the key CX and footfall trends from last year's golden quarter. Plus, we'll highlight what high performers did differently to succeed. Second, we'll look into how employee experience aligned with customer satisfaction. And we'll wrap up with best practices you can start implementing right now. If questions pop up as we go, just drop them into the comments and we'll pick them up at the end. Scott, before we dive into last year's trends, can you share a little about how the data foundation behind today's insights? Just tell us a little bit about that foundation.
Yeah, thank you a lot. Thanks a lot, Jamie. Appreciate it. Before we dive into the context of what we're describing to you today, maybe a little bit of background for you on who we are. For those of you that don't know us, first of all, HappyOrNot helps businesses collect feedback for their customers, both on the customer side and the employee side, of course, to improve operations. And then Sensormatic Solutions is a global technology provider tracking shopper journey, helping loss prevention, and also manage inventory management. And we're really happy to present to you today as a combined force, so to speak. The good news of everything we're presenting to you today, it's based on actual quantitative data, as you can see here summarized in this specific slide. And it's based on our most recent retail experience report, which is comprised of 57 million in-store feedback points collected in 2024 across thousands of retail locations throughout North America and Europe. And of course, we're tracking the customer experience sentiment trends quarter by quarter and sector by sector throughout that report. And by the way, for those of you who have not had a chance to review that report in full, we would encourage all of you to download and access that. It's full of really useful, insightful data. But more importantly, we've layered that customer sentiment data with Sensormatic foot traffic data. So now we're getting the best of both worlds, so to speak. Not only the customer sentiment data, but now we're also tracking that across actual retail foot traffic data. So we're getting a combined 360-degree view of what retailers are actually facing day to day in their operations. And as far as today's presentation is concerned, we're actually going to take a deep dive look at the Q4 trends, given we're rapidly approaching the Q4 in this calendar year. So we'll take a look at what Jamie alluded to as the golden quarter, of course. We'll take some separate looks or glances at regional comparisons across North America and Europe. And then, as I briefly alluded to, we can also now give you some insight on how the employee experience part of retail operations actually impacts the customer experience segment of retail operations and give you that combined perspective as well. So all of that is extracted, so to speak, from the retail report that we've recently published. backed up again by quantitative data. So now let's take a brief look at why Q4 is really so instrumental in the retail space in general. And I think most of you are probably familiar with this, but for many retailers, Q4 is truly the most important quarter of the year. So you can see here up to 50% of a retailer's total annual revenue can be pegged to Q4. It's that meaningful. And as you can imagine, and even maybe think of your own personal lives in shopping trends in general, but foot traffic and customer traffic also peaks in Q4. And that ultimately leads to really intense pressures on operations teams to manage that increased foot traffic and spike in foot traffic throughout Q4. And as you can see, singular missteps throughout serving customers in an efficient manner can yield major revenue loss in Q4. And just speaking from my own experience, I'll share one anecdote with you. I'm sure this will resonate with plenty of you out there. My wife and I were actually shopping last Q4 in 2024 during the holiday season. And we were shopping within a major retailer in the US, and we spent a good 45 minutes shopping, filled a pretty healthy basket, quite frankly. And then when we got to the checkout line, there were no less than 50 to 60 people waiting to get checked out in the line. And we waited probably 10 to 15 minutes and lost patience and decided to leave the store without actually checking out. So that particular instance meant that retailer lost, just roughly speaking, $75 in sales from us. And I have no doubt there were others in that particular instance that chose to leave as well. So that one retailer in that one instance, in that one location, just a rough estimate, lost hundreds of dollars that day because their checkout process was not efficient and aligned to what needed to be happening during the really busy holiday season. On the flip side of that, retailers that do get it right ultimately build more credibility and more confidence from shoppers and customers, because they're doing the right things to prepare and can serve those types of experiences in an efficient and productive manner. And last but definitely not least, everything that happens in Q4 leading up to the end of the season with the Christmas shopping, etc. If retailers are doing things in an intelligent way, in a planned and organized way, that will also, of course, leak into the following calendar year and continue that trend in a positive direction and continue building on that positive brand perception well beyond the Q4 timeframe. So now let's take a brief look at last year's Q4 data. And you'll start to see some actual trends from that retail experience report surfaced here in our presentation. And I'll just share some context as we look at this first chart. But what we're looking at is the customer experience sentiment scores across 2022, 2023, and 2024, broken down by quarter. So again, just a refresher, all of these scores are captured through the HappyOrNot service in real time. So these actually represent real, true customer sentiments that we're collecting in real time as those shoppers are experiencing their journey within those retailers. But the good news here is you can see Q4 in 2024 yielded the highest customer experience sentiment across all 3 years that we're illustrating here. And what that ultimately means, and this is great news for retailers out there, what that ultimately means is that you've learned lessons throughout the previous 2 years coming out of the COVID experience and all of that fun stuff. You started to better equip your teams to handle that Q4 rush. So what you're seeing here is a true rebound, so to speak, and as you can see in our last bullet point, even outperforming the pre-pandemic peak periods. So this does prove that retailers are learning the lessons of these peak periods, that are equipping their teams, ensuring inventory is what it needs to be, and ultimately that yields a better customer experience. Now, from a customer experience perspective, let's transition into a foot traffic perspective, and I will hand the baton off to Andy.
Thanks, Scott. So we observed some really interesting shifts last holiday season. Overall, we saw strong traffic all quarter, as you'd expect, with some especially big spikes in late November around Black Friday. A notable shift, however, from previous years was that traffic seemed even more evenly distributed across weekdays and weekends. So that meant there was less of a Saturday mountain, more of a steady climb every day towards that weekend. So stores needed to deliver consistent execution all week long and not just be gearing up for the weekends. Now, of course, these traffic patterns weren't identical everywhere. We also saw some pretty significant regional differences as well, which we'll unpack over the next few slides. But if we start with North America, I'll hand back to you, Scott.
Thank you, Andy. So yeah, we're going to take a look at two different slides for North America specifically here consecutively. The first slide, as you can see, breaks down traffic and customer sentiment by quarter across 2024. And up top here, you can see the shopper traffic, I should say, data coming from Sensormatic. And if I look specifically at Q3 and Q4, and what we're showing here is the trend change compared to the previous year. So you can see Q3 and Q4 compared to 2023 were generally flat, generally within the noise, but consistently strong foot traffic is the name of the game there. And then you can see comparatively tied to the customer experience sentiment in the bottom portion of that chart. And again, as we were speaking about before, you can see the trend generally holding strong across all 4 quarters, but spiking in Q4. So foot traffic held strongly and sentiment held strongly in Q4, and indeed peaking in Q4 at 92.5%, as you can see there. And then if we drill down specifically into Q4, and once again, we're bringing this down by month over the quarters. You can see here, foot traffic spiked in November, a slight decrease in December compared to December of 2023, but still robust nonetheless. But most importantly, as we've been alluding to, customer experience sentiment stayed strong throughout all 3 months, and again, peaked in December. So as I was describing earlier, the preparations that retailers were making throughout the year to prepare for the busy Q4 season indeed paid off. And that's proven quantitatively by the customer sentiment that we've been collecting. So that once again involves ramping up staffing, making sure those checkout lines and checkout process were efficient and counter what I described in my own personal experience in that instance, ensuring inventory stayed sharp and strong, just general readiness to answer customers' questions. All of that spells out into a positive customer experience. And the data proves that retailers in general are paying more and more attention to that based on what we saw in Q4 last year. And with that said, Andy, let's have a look at the same data, but from a European perspective.
Thanks, Scott. So again, on the left-hand side, the same visuals as you saw on Scott's slides, but this time for Europe. And you can see that in European retail, customer experience remained stable through the first 3 quarters of 2024, hovering around the sort of 91% mark. But the real highlight here is Q4. During the busiest period, this jumped to 92.1% and became the strongest quarter of the year. However, when we look closer, December was more volatile than what we saw in North America, and that exposed really the pressure points in planning and execution. quite possibly. So if we look closer at what happened later in the quarter, we'll just move on to the next slide. And we can see where the customer satisfaction and traffic trends in Q4 specifically went. So October and November tracked closely with North America, but in December, satisfaction dropped by a few points, breaking that kind of upward trajectory. One of the big factors behind that was unpredictable traffic. European retailers faced more volatile footfall. Some of the expected peak days were unexpectedly quiet, while others spiked beyond what was forecast. And this made it a lot harder to plan staffing and movement of inventory effectively. Now, it's likely that the cumulative team fatigue from the long peak season and surprise rushes impacted service quality. And in those final weeks, we'll have seen the brunt of that. This will have resulted in, as Scott was describing earlier, longer queues, longer waits, and potentially less attentive interactions with customers. So with that in mind, let's have a look at some more detail from the Happy or Not data, what frustrated customers. Back to you, Scott.
Thank you, Andy. So obviously, as we're collecting customer sentiment feedback, part of that, most importantly, is to try to shine light or identify areas that can be improved. And we've referenced a few of those already as we've been describing these trends. But what we've done here is we've broken out the top 5 pain points by regions. You've got North America on the left-hand slide or side of the slide, and Europe on the right-hand side of the slide. And you'll notice some distinct differences between the two regions, which is kind of really fascinating to drill into. So first, we'll look at North America. So the top pain point is generally tied to speed issues. And again, going back to my own personal experience last year, speed was definitively my main concern in that instance. We just could not get through the checkout process fast enough. Secondly, you see staff availability. So as shoppers are actually engaged in their search for items they're looking for in a retail location, might have some questions. Finding staff to help them is a challenge in many cases. You'll also notice cleanliness was a top concern, top 3 anyway in North America. If you look at Europe, then similar trends there at the top. So again, speed of the service and the general visit was number 1. But then one interesting shift trend there is the prices and value come into play. So European shoppers definitely looking for a better value experience compared to North America. So that came out in the data. And then cleanliness came in 3rd, as well as a similar trend from the US as well. So some consistencies, again, speed at the top of the list, but some distinct differences as well across the two regions. But the main point here is to drill into what is actually leading to shopper dissatisfaction. And most importantly, these retailers can learn these lessons in real time and make changes in real time to shore up some of these challenges, whether it be adding more staff, training staff in a better way to handle customer questions, perhaps adding some mobile checkout lines to get customers through in a speedier fashion. But as we're collecting data in real time, that allows retailers to make changes in real time as they're seeing these challenges crop up. So as we uncover the pain points, there are, of course, retailers out there that are doing a tremendous job. And we've studied and analyzed what the high performers are actually doing and have done in the past to exceed customers' expectations. And here's a short list of some of those really important lessons. So first and foremost, again, as I just mentioned, acting in real time based on the feedback that customers are delivering to them is critical, because they can see what's happening each day, each hour throughout a shift, identify the bottlenecks, whether it be staffing shortages, or inventory shortages and correct those as it's actually happening to avoid that downward trend. As foot traffic spikes in Q4, as we've already talked about, that will mean more staffing is needed. Perhaps some scheduling changes are needed among those staffs that are being added. So just paying close attention to the staffing to make sure that they're ahead of the curve on the increased foot traffic that will be coming in Q4. And I've already mentioned this multiple times, but streamlining the checkout process is definitely critical. As I just showed you on that last slide, the speed of service, the responsiveness, that's what customers expect now. No one wants to wait 30 minutes to get checked out during the busiest time of year. That could be maybe the single most important recommendation to focus on in Q4 is to ensure the checkout process is optimal and efficient for customers. And then using previous data as lessons learned and then create forecasting models based on what you've learned in the past is also critical. And lastly, just monitoring every single day what's going on, speaking to store managers and district managers to be sure their voice is being heard to correct obstacles and challenges throughout the day. That is also really important to make sure Q4 is optimal. But across those 5 elements, those trends are definitely key in what we've learned as far as the best performing retailers in our experience. And with that said, let's move on. And Jamie, maybe sprinkle in some employee experience perspectives into the mix at this stage.
All righty. Thank you so much, Scott. So as you can see here, let's see here. I think we're on the wrong slide. Just one second. Okay, so for here, you guys can see on this line graph that one big insight from our 2024 data was that the EX and the CX experiences, they peaked together in Q4. So earlier in the year, we saw some disconnects between the trends, but by Q4, those retailers who added seasonal capacity, they gave more scheduling flexibility. They provided on-the-spot manager support during those rushes. They saw a real lift in both the employee morale and the customer experience. And a lot of that came from, simple rituals, short opening huddles, to set a plan, micro breaks after the busiest windows, and of course, frequent thank yous. So we know happy, supported teams are going to create better customer moments, and it really shows up in those numbers. All right, so let's dig a little bit deeper and look at how the employee experience fluctuates through a typical week in the peak season. So where does strain show up first? So during Q4, our data shows that employees are happiest midweek. Probably not a big surprise. So come the weekend, employee satisfaction drops sharply on Saturdays, and then it recovers, as you can see, slightly on Sundays. And that's exactly when the traffic is the heaviest. That's when we have those high pressure days. And especially if we have those high pressure days without that added support, that means that morale is going to be much lower. And then we can see those employee experience dips, and then that CX friction rises. So the good news is, of course, these patterns are predictable. So when you know what days are in the danger zone, you can plan accordingly. All right, so now that we've covered last year's CX and footfall trends, and of course, why that employee experience really matters, let's wrap up with best practices so that you can start implementing now as you prepare for Q4. And then back over to you, Scott.
Thank you, Jamie. All right. It truly is hard to believe we're basically in the middle of September and Q4 is right around the corner. Each year has gone by in a snap, but there's still time to plan for it. I'm sure many of you have already started planning for Q4. It's going to be a very busy Q4, I have no doubt, but the time is now to get going. I think we've shared some good insight with you on the benefits of planning and getting your teams ready collectively to prepare for the rush. But that means a lot of different things, primarily leveraging forecasts on your historical data, but also more importantly, combining that with real-time data to learn every single day what's happening, align to your forecasts, and make changes accordingly. Jamie just talked about staffing and training and getting your employees ready and measuring their experience as well, but that's definitively an important step of this process to get ready for Q4. Prioritize their readiness as a team. You can start planning as far as additional training, coordinating better shift schedules, cross-training staff to better equip questions that might be coming up in your retail locations, just better supporting them overall. I think it's also important to highlight the fact that you can't just depend on a singular day or week in Q4 as being the busiest time. Q4 will definitely be a full season, so to speak. So again, just don't depend on Black Friday or the Christmas week for focusing on the customer experience. That has to be a full quarter perspective to ensure you're well aligned every single day throughout the quarter. And lastly, might recommend to you that it's important to check in regularly with your teams. Again, they're the front line, they're facing customers each and every day, all day long. It's important for their voice to be heard. So be sure you're checking in regularly with them and learn from them to adjust any other operational details that can be shifted throughout Q4. And if you're spending time and attention now on getting ready across all of these different elements, no doubt your customer experience is going to be improved, and that's going to, of course, yield in better revenue for you throughout the holiday season. And Jamie, let's go back to you to wrap up.
All right. Thank you. Thanks so much, Scott and Andy. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. We'll take a second and see if there are any questions in the chat. And then if not, please make sure you guys connect with us on LinkedIn. The HappyOrNot and the Sensormatic Solutions teams are happy to follow up with you one-on-one after the session, of course. And we are wishing you a successful golden quarter ahead.